Quite sure he's right. An obsession is neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, March 24th, 2025, the 64th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. And I hope that this here Rumble platform will work throughout my show today so that we can have a normal one. I don't know. I would imagine people don't actually think about this, but doing a live stream where your primary platform just drops away and then for 3 hours you feel like you're just speaking out into the void. It's a very, very strange feeling. So thank you guys for sticking with me on Friday, and a bunch of people ended up watching the stream. I did a replay over the weekend and that worked out well. So thank you guys for your patience and support. And let's go ahead and get into it. This was actually from, well, hold on a second. Yeah, it was from Thursday. I missed it toward the end of last week, but it was about an anniversary that fell on Sunday, just yesterday. This is from the White House, 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech. And so I figured we could go ahead and join the White House in marking the anniversary of this great speech. And this will put us in the right frame of mind to start yet another week in whatever this thing is that we're all doing. The statement reads, "Our nation proudly commemorates the 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry's address to the Second Virginia Convention, a seminal moment in our great American story and a fateful turning point in America's epic struggle for independence. On March 23rd, 1775, Patrick Henry rose to the pulpit of St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia, to speak those immortal words that remain etched upon every American heart: give me liberty or give me death. In the wake of escalating tensions between the Patriots and the Redcoats, Henry delivered this stirring address before more than 100 delegates, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and many of the statesmen who would go on to sign the Declaration of Independence. Following the bloody Boston Massacre and the British Parliament's authoritarian imposition of the Intolerable Acts, which closed the Boston Harbor and stripped New England colonists of their right to self-govern, American leaders deliberated whether to continue their pursuit of peace or, as a final recourse, to take up arms in the rebellion. With British tyranny on the rise and American confidence in retreat, the Second Virginia Convention assembled. Patrick Henry, a respected lawyer who had recently served as a delegate to the Continental Congress, arrived at the convention with one goal in mind: to galvanize militiamen into securing, quote, our inestimable rights and liberties from those further violations with which they are threatened, end quote. Some members cautioned against such decisive action, insisting that peaceful reconciliation was still possible. But as Henry listened, he grew more impatient. A Baptist minister who observed the proceedings later recalled that he had an unearthly fire burning in his eye. Overcome with righteous indignation, Henry rose from his seat with no notes in hand, boldly beseeching his fellow Virginians, if we wish to be free, we must fight. At a moment when America's fate hung in the balance, Henry's words sparked daring action in the souls of patriots, fortified the cause of freedom, and set America on the path to ultimate triumph over forces of tyranny and oppression. By a narrow margin, the Second Virginia Convention passed the resolution to form a militia, the first critical step to independence. It is not now easy to say what we should have done without Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson later wrote. He was before us all in maintaining the spirit of the Revolution. As we approach the 250th anniversary of our nation's independence on July 4th, 2026, we look to Patrick Henry, a son of the frontier, the first and sixth governor of Virginia, an unflinching advocate for American independence and a true man of his moment. Today, we invoke his courage, we honor his legacy, and we fearlessly summon the spirit of 1776 to build a future that we will be proud to impart on our children. Like Patrick Henry and the giants of American liberty who came before us, now is our time to ring that great bell of American freedom and to propel our nation into a new and radiant golden age. And Donald Trump, in signing this, notes that he set his hand to it and also noted that this is the year of the independence of the United States of America, the 249th. And so I continue to highlight when Trump highlights these things because he is making clear that the 250th anniversary of our founding, of our nation, is 2026 and not the 250th anniversary of the ratification of the Constitution, which was in 1789. That would make our 250th anniversary, if we were going by the Constitution, in 2039. We're not doing that. We're doing it next year. In fact, we're starting to do it this year. Patrick Henry gave that speech March 23rd, just yesterday, 250 years ago. The Continental Army was formed in 1775. And of course, the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. The celebration of the 250th birthday of this country is scheduled by Trump, assuming that he sticks to his plans, and I have no reason to believe he won't, will be from May at some point this year till July 4th of 1776. And we noted last week that Donald Trump had hung the Declaration of Independence in the Oval Office and showed it off to Laura Ingraham, peeling back the curtains to reveal the Declaration of Independence. And I think that John and I briefly talked about this on DPH on Saturday, and maybe it was someone in the comments who asked where it had been the whole time, because Trump talked about it being in an archive or in a vault of some sort. And the question was whether or not, is that the original copy of the Declaration of Independence, or is it just a reproduction, a copy of that? The Associated Press says Trump hangs a copy of Declaration of Independence in Oval Office. This was from March 17th, so a week ago. They noted that it was not immediately clear where the copy came from and when it was installed. The National Archives delivered the Declaration of Independence to the White House at the president's request. It is displayed in the Oval Office, where it will be carefully protected and preserved. That from the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. The Associated Press notes the original version of the Declaration of Independence is very faded and displayed in the Archives building. On the version hanging in the White House, according to the images posted, the words are clear and legible. The White House and National Archives did not respond to messages inquiring what version of the document was in the White House. Trump's post did not include any other information than the words, the Declaration of Independence in the Oval Office. And they go through some of the decor and, of course, the Diet Coke button. These people are ridiculous. It's like everything they have to make seem just a little bit silly and anti-Trump, keeping with the theme that nothing Trump does is actually official or important or serious in any way. It's just all this ego-driven display of Trump's narcissism until the adults get back in the room and take our government back over from the people. So, what is the story with the Declaration of Independence? The world may never know. I certainly do not pretend to be able to adjudicate that matter. I have no idea the provenance of that particular copy of the Declaration of Independence, nor do I have any reason to believe that the National Archives has properly stored the original Declaration of Independence. And the fact that it is very faded and seemingly falling apart in the National Archives, the David Rubenstein National Archives, is just one more element of, I don't know, intrigue, uncertainty to add into the situation. It would be better if we could actually trust the authorities on any of this stuff. But of course we can't. The National Archives hold all of the secrets of the United States of America. They hold all our important documents commemorating all of these important events. And because those are the originals and very, very important, we're just going to have to then trust them that they are faithfully replicating the originals when they're willing to display them to us at all. And to be clear, for the fact checkers out there, in case they ever come across this episode, no, I'm not saying David Rubenstein literally owns the National Archives. I am referencing an episode that we did, I don't know, a month or two ago about David Rubenstein's role in the collection and hence capture of our nation's important documents and the control that he inevitably ends up possessing over those documents. One of those episodes was from February 10th. It's called Lullaby. The other is from February 12th, and that is called Focusing on the Wrong Constitutional Crises. All right. So to update on another story from last week, in fact, I missed this last week, but do find it very interesting. Radio Free Europe sues Trump administration over funding cuts, and this was originally printed in Forbes, now reprinted on MSN. So Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, the U.S.-funded global news outlet, sued the Trump administration over its decision to terminate all federal grants to the entity, making it the latest entity to seek legal remedy against the White House's push to slash funding for several key government programs and agencies. And of course, we're going to spend some time on the quote-unquote judicial coup that has been ongoing. But it's interesting to see a branch of the an outgrowth of the executive branch, one of the agencies that is governmental or quasi-governmental, suing the government, suggesting that the executive branch doesn't have within it the authority to stop running these agencies while they are subverting the administration's mandate. Donald Trump, as I have said many times now, I believe to be the only legitimate member of the federal government of the United States of America, to the extent we still have a federal government in the United States of America, and I'm not entirely certain that we do. But to the extent that we do, Donald Trump is clearly the only person with a public mandate. He actually has an obvious and overwhelming public mandate, which should further highlight the illegitimacy of the Congress, the Senate, and the judiciary. But these stories, as we go along, are doing their job in highlighting all of that. There is, of course, no legitimacy for any executive branch agency beyond that which the executive gives it. If the Congress sets up an agency and sets aside funding for that agency, there is not constitutionally any reason why the president would then have to run that agency or delegate the running of that agency to those in the agency, or use the funding set aside for that agency and actually spend that money and facilitate the spending of that money. And we're seeing these particular constitutional questions be adjudicated in public at this point. In a key filing before the District of Columbia Federal Court on Tuesday, the District of Columbia, the DC court, always the court of the foreign occupation, the Global Broadcast Network sued the United States Agency for Global Media, the agency's special advisor, Carrie Lake, and interim CEO, Victor Morales. The suit accused USAGM of acting in violation of the U.S. Constitution as the scrapped funds had been appropriated by Congress specifically for RFE and RL, that's RadioFree Europe, Radio Liberty. The filing says the agency refused to disperse the funds, quote, on the basis that it is ending its non-statutory functions, end quote, before arguing that funding the broadcaster's operations is a statutory function of the agency. In the suit, the broadcaster argued that Congress appropriated funding for its operations, quote, in recognition of the critical role that RFE/RL plays in providing accurate, uncensored news in countries where a free press is threatened. And of course, as we discussed on Friday, this is from the perspective of the global state propaganda media. It is these news outlets worldwide are promoting what is referred to as pro-American narratives, but these are not pro-American narratives. These are pro-regime narratives that are nonetheless distributed by American quasi-governmental organizations like this one. The broadcaster said it was seeking urgent relief on the matter, as the lack of access to critical funds will mean RFE and RL will soon be forced to cease to exist in its current form. And so the question becomes whether or not the executive branch can allow these agencies that supposedly have the imprimatur of our illegitimate and totally captured Congress to wither on the vine. And it's pretty clear that by the Constitution, they would. The executive cannot be forced by the legislative branch to operate an agency. The legislative branch legislates. They can't force the president to then delegate authority and resources to running an agency that the president believes subverts his own agenda that he was mandated by the people to implement. Okay, so we can jump down a bit. These moves were part of a White House order calling for the continued reduction of the federal bureaucracy by reducing the functions of several unnecessary governmental entities to the minimum that is required by law. Lake, who was appointed as the director of Voice of America and as a USAGM special advisor by Trump, said waste, fraud, and abuse run rampant in this agency, and American taxpayers shouldn't have to fund it. The arguments raised by RFE and RL's suit partially mirror those made by former employees and contractors of the USAID. Former USAID workers sued the Trump administration and the Elon Musk-led Department of Government Efficiency for their efforts to dismantle the foreign aid agency. Earlier on Tuesday, a Maryland federal judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and noted that the shutdown of USAID likely violated the Constitution by depriving, quote, the public's elected representatives in Congress of their authority to decide whether, when, and how to close down an agency created by Congress. Well, no, they can certainly do that. They are actually asserting an extra power, the power to force the executive to operate these agencies or to allow these agencies their claim to independence to operate themselves, even if they are operating in what the president deems to be direct opposition to his own agenda that he was mandated by the people to implement. In a statement, the president and CEO, Stephen Kappas, said this is not the time to cede terrain to the propaganda and censorship of America's adversaries. We believe the law is on our side and that a celebration of our demise by despots around the world is premature. Well, if despots around the world are celebrating your demise, and your demise is brought about by the Trump administration operating in line with the mandate given to him by the people, then those celebrating your demise would be despots around the world, the president of the United States, and the people of the United States. So if the people of the United States and the president of the United States happen to have interests that are aligned with so-called despots around the world, well, okay, but it's actually the people's interest and the president's interest and the opinions of despots around the world as defined by members of the uniparty regime in America, the evil twin faction of our government, the foreign occupation. Why should anyone care about that? Who are you siding with? They claim to be going against these despots around the world, but what they're actually going against are the concerns of the people around the world who live under sovereign nationalist regimes who do not align with the global regime and the global regime's agenda for the one world liberal international rules-based order. So whose side are you on, Stephen Kappas? Because you don't seem to be on the side of the American people, and you are using claims toward the despotism of other world leaders as a justification for us propagandizing the populations of other countries. If we just allowed uninterrupted, decentralized control over communication networks around the world, would these things be a problem? Maybe we should just try it rather than using propaganda and censorship to attempt to lead the rest of the world toward accepting the one world liberal international rules-based order. And as we discussed as well on Friday, we are coming up on Liberation Day. Liberation Day, according to Donald Trump, another Liberation Day, of course, because November 5th was also Liberation Day. So perhaps we will be as liberated as we were on November 5th. And the amount we were liberated on November 5th, just to be honest about the record, is 0%. Things are exactly the same now as then. Although we have much better television programming now, it makes us feel much more confident and powerful and in control. So Liberation Day, next Wednesday, April 2nd, the Wall Street Journal is concerned about what Liberation Day means. Who are the dirty 15 trade partners? The Trump administration is focusing on applying tariffs to about 15% of nations with persistent trade imbalances with the U.S., the so-called Dirty 15, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put it last week. The administration hasn't released a list, but targeted nations are expected to be close to those laid out by the U.S. Trade Representative in a Federal Register notice last month, which directed commenters to focus on economies with trade imbalances with the U.S. Who does the U.S. have the biggest goods trade deficits with? Last year, it was, in descending order, China, the EU, Mexico, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Canada, India, Thailand, Switzerland, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and South Africa. Now, all that is very interesting. Who opened the United States economy to China? That would be globalists like Morning Mika's dad and Henry Kissinger and George H.W. Bush, the former director of the CIA and maybe the progenitor of many of our problems. Then we have the EU, a collectivist organization that attempts to make all of the European nations in the EU membership abide by the same policies. Then we have Mexico, which is historically at least under a significant amount of globalist control. Vietnam, Taiwan, a global regime proxy state. Japan, essentially a global regime proxy state. South Korea, a non-existent nation occupied by the United States military now for 70 plus years and a global regime proxy state. Canada, a member of the British Commonwealth and a global regime proxy state. Switzerland, the home of the global regime. India, a former British colony and global regime proxy state, although seems less so now. I mean, do you notice a trend? The trend, of course, is in top-down control over the global economy. And that is the primary purpose of the tariffs, is to disrupt the top-down global control over the world economy. This is Bloomberg from Saturday. Trump plans his tariff liberation day with more targeted push. President Donald Trump's coming wave of tariffs is pointed to be more targeted than the barrage he has occasionally threatened. Aides and allies say a potential relief for markets gripped by anxiety about an all-out tariff war. And we were told a few weeks ago that the announcement of tariffs on Canada and Mexico disrupted our economy, causing the markets to crash. And then when those tariffs were delayed, the markets kept crashing because of uncertainty. They're gripped by anxiety, we are led to believe. Trump is preparing a Liberation Day tariff announcement on April 2nd, unveiling so-called reciprocal tariffs he sees as retribution for tariffs and other barriers from other countries, including longtime U.S. allies, aka regime proxy states. While the tariff announcement would remain a very significant expansion of U.S. tariffs, it's shaping up as more focused than the sprawling, fully global effort Trump has otherwise mused about, officials familiar with the matter say. Trump will announce widespread reciprocal tariffs on nations or blocs, but is set to include some, and as of now, the administration is not planning separate sectoral specific tariffs to be unveiled at the same event, as Trump had once teased, officials said. Still, Trump is looking for immediate impact with his tariffs, planning announced rates that would take effect right away, one of the officials said, and the measures are likely to further strain ties with allied nations and provoke at least some retaliation, threatening a spiraling escalation. Only countries that don't have tariffs on the U.S. and with whom the U.S. has a trade surplus will not be tariffed under the reciprocal plan, an official said. April 2nd is going to be Liberation Day for America. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe, Trump said in the Oval Office Friday. It would bring in tens of billions, he added, while another aide said recently the tariffs could bring in trillions of dollars over a decade. But the market reaction to initial tariffs imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China, as well as certain metals, has hung heavy over a West Wing serving a president who has long used major indexes as a measuring stick of his success. So what is the point is to disrupt the top-down centralized control over the global economy. That is a direct threat to the way the global regime has operated for decades. And of course, it is a direct threat and potentially total defeat of some of the critical aspects of the global regime's control apparatus, control mechanism, control agenda, whatever you want to say, for nations around the world. They want to control global state propaganda media to influence reputations, to influence populations. They can go after individuals. They can go after corporations. They can take down politicians. They destroy reputations of countries, companies, and individuals. They control economies. They control the currency. They can use economic warfare in the form of sanctions. They can use boycotts, as they did in World War II or leading up to World War II. And then they control resources and trade routes. And finally, when all that fails, they have Team America World Police to go around the globe, operating to overthrow and then control nations in service of that top-down, centralized, one world, liberal international, rules-based order. Tariffs will essentially end the ability to control resources and trade routes and the global economy. You can't have a boycott without that global economic control over resources, over trade routes, over finances, and then over the story, because nobody's going to support it. So this is just another peg being knocked down in the battle against the global regime. You know, there are people who still think that this theory of the case is somehow mistaken, that the global regime maybe doesn't exist or doesn't operate in this way, that top-down control is impossible. We actually had an interesting discussion, a quick discussion, but I think I'm going to clip it later and put it up, about the role of secret societies. We've been talking a lot about the justices, and we'll get to Judge Boasberg in a bit. But there was a story out last week about John Roberts and how he was part of a secret society of judges and lawyers called the Inns of Court. And I haven't spent a lot of time on the Inns of Court. I'm interested in learning more. So if you've gone down that rabbit hole, by all means, send that my way. But any secret society that is coordinating activity in the background is able to influence things in a way that the system that work outside of the system. So it means it's not actually the system functioning when decisions are made outside of the system, behind the scenes, within these little enclaves, these secret societies. And then when judges, for instance, in this case, are working in their public role, the perception among the public is that they are just doing their duty as their position, as their office demands. But that's not what they're doing. They're working in service and in the interests of the secret society where the activity was coordinated in advance. And so if you apply that model broadly to the corporate world, the academic world, political parties, governments, etc., you can go just right on down the list. If you apply that model, it doesn't actually, the way that this kind of pervasive influence can operate throughout a society, throughout industries, throughout governments, etc., becomes much easier to imagine. It's not that there's like one source controlling all the behaviors of each and every individual. It just implements an incentive structure. It has a position on the major issues. It expects the members who are participating in that incentive structure to do as they know they must do or should do if they want to continue advancing. And then all you need is a punishment structure to go after the ones who aren't pushing that agenda forward. And if people know that that incentive and punishment structure exists, and they know what the desires of the secret society are, or the whatever controlling group, sometimes it's not even secret, then they're just responding to the incentives. And if the incentive and punishment structure is correctly tailored, then it's going to generate the same results over and over and over again. And because that incentive structure is always going to cater to those top-down interests, because it has to, because it needs the media working on a reputational basis. It needs the economic element. So at some point, the banks and financial interests are involved. It needs the resources, it needs the trade routes, it needs to be able to operate. So the top-down elements of control are then not that difficult to understand. It's a situation that becomes totally natural. Let us continue. Donald Trump posted about tariffs and Venezuela this morning. So this will provide us a segue to discuss Judge Boasberg, the trials and tribulations of Judge Boasberg. It's so weird that we end up knowing about these characters. Like, why? Where was the need in our lives just a month ago to know about Judge James Jeb Boasberg? Nowhere, that's where. President Donald J. Trump on Truth Social this morning. President Donald J. Trump announced today that the United States of America will be putting what is known as a secondary tariff on the country of Venezuela for numerous reasons, including the fact that Venezuela has purposefully and deceitfully sent to the United States undercover tens of thousands of high-level and other criminals, many of whom are murderers and people of a very violent nature. Among the gangs they sent to the United States is Tren de Aragua, which has been given the designation of foreign terrorist organization. We are in the process of returning them to Venezuela. It is a big task. In addition, Venezuela has been very hostile to the United States and the freedoms which we espouse. Therefore, any country that purchases oil and or gas from Venezuela will be forced to pay a tariff of 25% to the United States on any trade they do with our country. All documentation will be signed and registered, and the tariff will take place on April 2nd, 2025, Liberation Day in America. Please let this notification serve to represent that the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and all other law enforcement agencies within our country have been so notified. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And the phrasing of that is kind of reminiscent to the discussion back in the first term of Donald J. Trump as president, where we determined that Donald Trump's Twitter posts were official statements of the President of the United States of America, and that Truth Social post as well seems like an official statement of the United States of America, of the President of the United States of America, I should say. And he actually had, let me see if I can find this from yesterday. He had another post kind of in that direction yesterday, talking about how Truth Social is the true voice of America. And it kind of lines up a little bit, at least, with the article we just read about the voice of America. Hold for processing. I'm probably almost there. I'm hopefully almost there. Trump also, by the way, while we're at it, retruthed a post of his. Let's just tangent over here because, you know, the 14th Amendment stuff, I just cannot resist. He retruthed this post from Friday, just yesterday. The 14th Amendment right of American citizenship has never had anything to do with modern gate crashers. illegal immigrants who break the law by being in our country. It had everything to do with giving citizenship to former slaves. Our founding fathers are, quote unquote, spinning in their graves at the idea that our country can be taken away from us. No nation in the world has anything like this. Our lawyers and judges have to be tough and protect America. I'm telling you, sooner or later, we are going to go right at that 14th Amendment, as fake and illegitimate as it is, despite the fact that most of our legal system is based on it. Here we are. It's got to go. It was never ratified. It was ratified by states that did not want to ratify it and other states that were essentially held at the tip of a bayonet, those state governments, until they went along with the ratification. The same is true of those Reconstruction Amendments. And as I often say, George P. Fletcher, Columbia University law professor, in his book, Our Secret Constitution, actually argues that the Civil War was waged to overturn the Constitution and fix it the way it is now. Get rid of the original Constitution, replace it with our secret Constitution, our second Constitution, as it is sometimes called, and that all of that was a good thing. This is the post I was looking for. Truth Social is on fire in a positive way, of course. It is my voice and the real voice of America. Sign up today. I have never let you down. Fair enough. The real voice of America. Is he talking about the Voice of America organization, the propaganda organization that smuggles, distributes, exports our propaganda to countries around the world in order to help the global regime at whose service our country operates overthrow other nations of the world, subvert their governments? Our democracy, always our democracy. Okay, so let's get back to Venezuela and let's update on the Alien Enemies Act, because something very, very strange happened on Friday afternoon and then into Friday evening after this show had ended. Donald Trump took questions outside of the White House as he was leaving. And this is what he said.
Anybody.
It doesn't sound like this judge who the DOJ is arguing with today about the deportation flights. He wants to know why the proclamation was signed in the dark, his words, and why people were rushed onto planes.
Because we want to get criminals out of our country, number one, and I don't know when it was signed because I didn't sign it. Other people handled it. But Marco Rubio's done a great job, and he wanted them out, and we go along with that. We want to get criminals out of our country.
If there was a flight like tonight with the...
So Peter Doocy asks him, the judge is saying that the proclamation, the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act was signed in the dark. And Trump says, well, I don't know about it being signed in the dark. Marco Rubio wanted it, so we did it. I'm not sure exactly who handled it. And this was very strange. It seemed to immediately cause some sort of controversy in the wake of the stories about Joe Biden's auto pen and the illegitimacy of his pardons and the rest of the actions his administration took by virtue of the fact that they were never actually signed by the president and may have been initiated without his knowledge. And so we're seeing an example of this controversial invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. And that's Donald Trump right there saying that he didn't sign it and that it was someone else's doing. Marco Rubio wanted it and his people handled it. Somebody else handled it. And this is especially strange in light of stories about Marco Rubio and Elon Musk having some kind of divide, Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff having some kind of divide, where Witkoff was being tasked with going around the world and handling these foreign policy issues and negotiations, where normally that would be the Secretary of State's job. So there's some interesting and strange stuff going on there. And then there's a story out of the Atlantic today that we're not going to talk about at any length because I kind of want to just see how this thing develops. But there are these headlines today. This story by Suckers and Losers hoaxer, Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg, total neocon warmonger, total Trump deranged never Trumper. The Atlantic magazine is just trash commie rag at this point that features nonstop neocon warmongering from David Frum and Julia Yaffe, I think, is still there, Ann Applebaum and the like. Goldberg claims that he was mysteriously added to a Signal group text. And in that group text were characters like Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, and others to talk about an imminent strike on the Houthis. And that Goldberg was on there and just watching this conversation. So he knew it was going to happen before it happened. Now, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Just the News, John Solomon, who's very well sourced within the Trump orbit, says that a National Security Council representative attests to the legitimacy of the messages in that text group. Hard to know what's going on there. Are they running an info op and using Jeffrey Goldberg as some kind of unwitting Trojan horse? Totally possible. And Goldberg actually admits in the article that maybe that's what's going on. It's very strange, though. And I think that we're going to have to just kind of give this one a couple days to develop. And by the way, if anyone in the chat at some point sees that Trump has updated about this story, by all means, bring that to my attention. But there's been some signals, at least at division here. John and I discussed this briefly on Saturday night. I consider Donald Trump entirely different than the rest of the quote unquote Trump administration. Again, the federal government is being dismantled. The idea that he is putting all the best people in all of these various roles in departments and agencies and organizations, quasi-governmental organizations, in roles that should not constitutionally exist and cannot constitutionally exist, that does not fit with the way I understand this operation to be evolving. Now, I could be wrong in my interpretation of how the operation is evolving, and we discuss other options pretty often, but I don't think I'm wrong. And the fact that half of them are Fox News television characters only makes it all that much stranger what's going on here. Now, there are, so in that group, we have Pete Hegseth, Fox News television character. Tulsi Gabbard, Fox News television character. John Ratcliffe is not a Fox News television character. He's the former DNI. Now he's running the CIA. He's been on Fox News a lot, but he's not a television character. I wouldn't call him a television character. J.D. Vance. Is J.D. Vance anything other than a television character? I don't know. And then who do we have? Mike Waltz, congressman. Did that cover it? I think maybe that covered it. So it's a strange group text to begin with. The idea that members of the administration are doing administration business. Oh, Stephen Miller is also rumored to be in that group text. Are these people actually discussing administration business and making decisions about how to operate like kinetic warfare in a Signal group text that includes the editor of The Atlantic? Something very, very strange is going on there. And I don't know what, so we're going to have to track this over the course of a few days. We shall see. Let us continue back to the CNN article. Trump says he didn't sign proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act. And so the initial indications on Friday, or our initial suspicions, were that maybe we were going to kind of reverse this narrative on the mainstream media. They had been protecting Biden's auto pen signature as legitimate. They have to at least give lip service to protecting the legitimacy of Joe Biden and his administration. Although who knows, at some point they might just rug pull themselves and their audiences on the last few years of that, if and when it becomes advantageous to them to suggest that actually all those Biden things, those were just really Trump things that Biden was doing for whatever reason, because Biden was doing the wrong thing or something. I don't think that they're going to tell us that Biden was just never president and Trump was using him as a puppet the entire time. I cannot imagine that will come along. CNN noted that Trump raised Rubio's name without prompting from reporters. When he was then asked a hypothetical question about whether he would send another deportation flight to El Salvador amid the ongoing litigation, Trump said it would be up to Rubio. I would say that I'd have the Secretary of State handle it because I'm not really involved in that. But the concept of getting bad people, murderers, rapists, drug dealers, all of these are some really bad people out of our country. I ran on that. I won on that. And of course, he's right. And so Donald Trump, is that the sort of thing that he should be delegating to the Secretary of State? You have to think, yeah, of course, that would be something that he would delegate to the Secretary of State or the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Defense or something. Someone is going to handle those foreign affairs. And he is clearly making it, or I should say, he's making it clear to the American public that this is authority he's delegated to Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is saying he needs the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to be able to remove these illegal aliens, these cartel members, these terrorists, as they are now classified, out of the country. So he is implying the split himself, and we will see how much meaning that ends up having. The White House's comms team has had a very strange response to this in general. This is from Friday night. Caroline Levitt here.
It was another very busy week here at the Trump White House. Here are the facts. President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport illegal migrant foreign terrorists and Tren de Aragua members to El Salvador. President Trump also launched decisive and powerful military action against Houthi terrorists.
Okay, so the rest of the video, it goes on with the highlights of the week for Trump, but that's Press Secretary Caroline Levitt, a TV character. She ran for Congress in New Hampshire. And again, when I say that someone's a TV character, it's not a slight to like their ability to do their job well. It really isn't. It's just making it clear that these people were popularized on various media outlets and now have stepped into significant roles. Now, press secretary, it's very good to be media savvy, and she is talented at what she does. Okay. That aside, who's running the comms? If Trump is saying, I didn't do this, this was delegated, well, then you can in one sense say the Trump administration did this. Trump is the person responsible for everything that happens in the administration. The buck stops with Trump. Therefore, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act. And that is what she said right there. So is that just prima facie a bad thing or wrong? No. But that's the White House's position Friday evening. And it's in at least some conflict with Trump's stated position earlier in the day, depending on how, you might perceive that. It's not necessarily in conflict, but it could be seen as being in conflict. This is the Washington Examiner. Also, no, sorry, this is from Saturday. Trump says, I didn't sign Alien Enemies Act invocation after White House said he did. And we're just going to skip to a few portions of this article. President Trump was obviously referring to the original Alien Enemies Act that was signed back in 1798. The White House told CNN. The recent executive order was personally signed by President Trump, invoking the Alien Enemies Act that designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization in order to apprehend and deport these heinous criminals. Now, you saw the video. Was it obvious that he was referring to the original Alien Enemies Act? I would argue that nothing could be less obvious than that. In fact, it is so not obvious that that interpretation is utterly impossible and makes no sense whatsoever. So let's just look at it one more time.
Anybody.
It doesn't sound like this judge, who the DOJ is arguing with today about the deportation flights. He wants to know why the proclamation was signed in the dark, his words, and why people were rushed onto planes.
Because we want to get criminals out of our country, number one, and I don't know when it was signed because I didn't sign it. Other people handled it. But Marco Rubio's done a great job, and he wanted them out, and we go along with that. We want to get criminals out of our country.
If there was a flight...
So I don't see any way to interpret that as Donald Trump suggesting that he was not responsible for signing the original Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Why would that even need to be said? And Trump didn't say it. It's pretty clear what he's referring to. Now, is the White House just making the media spin itself out into a frenzy? Totally possible. And if that's the intent, then they're doing a bang up job of it because the media clearly can't figure it out and they're still talking about it. And I'm not saying we can figure it out. I'm not sure there's an answer available at this point, but Trump definitely was not talking about that. So it's very, very strange that the White House is telling media organizations that. That, my friends, does not make sense. I don't think that I have done the Chewbacca defense. Why haven't I done the Chewbacca defense in here? Hold for processing. I'm going to grab this out of my... I'm almost sure that I made a Chewbacca defense video. Now, this is very, very disappointing. All right, well, another time for the Chewbacca defense. You can head to YouTube and search for South Park Chewbacca defense if you are interested in hearing the Chewbacca defense. And everyone should be, because it is really wonderful. Okay, let us continue. Let's get to Judge Boasberg. This is the update from today, and this is Here we are. Politico. Judge reaffirms order blocking Trump from using wartime powers for deportations. Strange looking man, this Judge Boasberg. And, you know, I don't think that we talked about this on Friday, so I might as well put this up because it really is quite surprising. And gosh, the strangeness of the pictures of these commies just never ceases to amaze me. Let's go ahead and look at this. So this is Raheem Kassam on X, formerly Twitter. He says, oh, look, that's Judge Boasberg alongside Judge Patricia Giles, who ruled on Thursday to block the deportation of a Georgetown student accused of spreading Hamas propaganda. Can you spot who else is in the picture? And let me see if maybe we can, I don't think we can zoom on that with that view. But from left to right, Deborah Katz, Judge Patricia Tolliver Giles, Judge Amy Berman Jackson, whose name we hear quite a lot. Next to her is Justice Stephen G. Breyer, former Supreme Court Justice. Judge Patricia A. Millett, that's the tall man, is Boasberg. Kamabla's husband, Doug Emhoff, is next to Boasberg. And then we have one of the cast members of the Addams family, who is, I guess, a woman named Marshall Pamela Tolkien. What a ridiculous looking outfit. The tailed tuxedo suit is strange. The vest is strange. The hair is ridiculous. It's amazing that these people are always able to look exactly like their politics would suggest they look. They look like, and I'm not the person who came up with this, but it's a great meme. They look like comic book villains. The new development, this is Politico, the new development from U.S. District Judge James Boasberg came just hours in advance of a critical courtroom showdown before a federal appeals court on Trump's deportation authority. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals was scheduled to hear arguments Monday afternoon on the Trump administration's effort to lift a restraining order that Boasberg imposed on March 15th. That order bars deportations under a proclamation Trump issued involving the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 against members of a Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua. In a 37-page opinion, Boasberg rejected the administration's request that he lift the restraining order himself. Boasberg said legal precedents are clear that even if Trump's invocation of the 2-century-old statute is valid, the people subject to it are entitled to a meaningful opportunity to dispute their deportation by presenting evidence, for instance, that they are not members of a gang. Summary deportation following close on the heels of the government's informing an alien that he is subject to the proclamation without giving him the opportunity to consider whether to voluntarily self-deport or challenge the basis for the order is unlawful, wrote Boasberg, an appointee of President Barack Obama. Boasberg, the chief judge of the federal district court in Washington, has been the focus of withering criticism from Trump and his allies in recent days, including calls for his impeachment. Now, that particular concern actually addresses a portion of the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. As we discussed last week, here is the invocation. And again, the invocation is posted on whitehouse.gov under presidential actions and carries the same Donald Trump imprimatur that we just went over in the invocation, not the invocation, but the celebration of Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. Now, 50 U.S. Code 2022 is the relevant law here, the relevant part of the U.S. Code. Whether or not that ends up being law in any significant way in a few years is impossible for us to currently know. But This presidential action reads, I further find and declare that all such members of TDA are, by virtue of their membership in that organization, chargeable with actual hostility against the United States and are therefore ineligible for the benefits of 50 U.S. Code 2022. 50 U.S. Code 22. And I can ask the machine about this. 50 U.S. Code 22 addresses the time allowed for alien enemies to settle their affairs and depart from the United States during times of war or national emergency. This law applies to aliens who become liable as enemies under 50 U.S. Code 21, but are not chargeable with actual hostility or other crimes against public safety. So their rights become their rights, as Judge Boasberg is putting forward, become invalid and nullified due to their designation as alien enemies. And the designation is actually just as wide as Trump deems it. So are we just having these issues hashed out in court? Do these issues need to be hashed out in the courts so they can be hashed out in the court of public opinion, and then a conclusion can be reached that will see us effectively forward? Perhaps. Otherwise, Judge Boasberg is just, as is the common perception, overstepping by leaps and bounds his authority as a district court judge. A district court judge telling the president that he is not allowed to execute his most important constitutional duty, which is his role as commander-in-chief in protecting the United States of America, in part against invasion. This is the reporter from Politico, Kyle Cheney, on X, formerly Twitter. Judge Boasberg rejects Trump administration call to rescind his restraining order, saying the Venezuelans marked for deportation under the Alien Enemies Act are likely to win because they are entitled to individual hearings and due process. Boasberg writes in his 37-page opinion, the court need not resolve the thorny question of whether the judiciary has the authority to assess this claim in the first place. That is because plaintiffs are likely to succeed on another equally fundamental theory. Before they may be deported, they are entitled to individualized hearings to determine whether the act applies to them at all. As the government itself concedes, the awesome power granted by the act may be brought to bear only on those who are, in fact, alien enemies. And the Supreme Court and this circuit have long maintained that federal courts are equipped to adjudicate that question when individuals threatened with detention and removal challenge their designation as such. So the courts have decided, again, for themselves, that they get to decide. And Judge Boasberg is reasserting that principle that is founded. The foundation of this is judicial review, which is itself on shaky foundation and should be overturned, and I think will be soon overturned. What was I going to say? Oh, I often recommend the Path to Liberty podcast from the 10th Amendment Center. They've been doing, I think now, at least 2 podcasts they've done on the Alien Enemies Act, and one in particular was about what qualifies as an alien enemy from the perspective of the people who initiated the Alien Enemies Act. If there is a country with whom we are at war, or that country is involved in some sort of incursion or invasion into the United States, it's not only the people actively part of the incursion or invasion or war effort who are then designated as alien enemies. It is literally anyone from that country. So if we were at war with China right now, all Chinese, not Chinese Americans, but all the Chinese who are not Chinese Americans and who are not citizens of the United States of America, would be subject to the classification of alien enemies and then deported with no other recourse available. They can argue about whether or not that's the right thing for whatever practical concerns you might have, but that's an across-the-board ability for the president to designate this is an enemy country. We are at war with them. They have staged an incursion into the United States of America. They are overseeing an invasion into the United States of America. All of the people of that country who are here can be deported under the Alien Enemies Act. Let's continue with that paragraph from Boasberg. The Supreme Court and this circuit have long maintained that federal courts are equipped to adjudicate that question when individuals threatened with the detention and removal challenge their designation as such. Okay, so I just went over that. Because the named plaintiffs dispute that they are members of Tren de Aragua, they may not be deported until a court has been able to decide the merits of their challenge, nor may any members of the provisionally certified class be removed until they have been given the opportunity to challenge their designations as well. The motion to vacate will thus be denied. Okay, so we have that issue to adjudicate, and Boasberg, the federal district court judge that should not exist and that constitutionally does not have to exist, he has taken it upon himself to reassert that the judiciary is the right place for the question of whether or not an illegal alien who is here as a member of an invading nation is a member of Tren de Aragua. So how long would it take for that to be adjudicated? Days, weeks, months, years? How many levels of the appeal process would that have to go through? A person's going to prove they are not part of Tren de Aragua and then suggest that the president does not have the right to deport them? That does not make, again, any sense. Chewbacca defense, that doesn't make any sense. Think about these things. You know, we don't take the ideas about war as Americans very seriously because we don't generally have war on our soil. Now, of course, we do have war on our soil. There are, I would even suggest, kinetic acts of warfare going on our soil on a consistent basis. And this could be, first of all, it's definitely irregular warfare. And there was actually a really interesting video put out over the weekend about irregular warfare from U.S. Special Operations Command. And actually, this is 2 minutes long. Let's take a break from me yapping and we can watch this for a minute. This is from USAOC News, or USA SOC, Special Operations Command News. Gosh, USAOC. We'll talk about AOC later, don't worry.
We protect the nation without fear, without fail, without
So all warfare is irregular warfare. So I was saying, we don't take war as seriously as we should as Americans, because our experience has been that all wars are fought overseas against countries that really deserve it, and we win all of them. That's what our culture teaches us. That's what our schools teach us. That does not seem to be the case when we take a critical look at much of what's happened throughout the history of our nation. Is it possible that we are currently in a state of having kinetic warfare waged against us? Yes, it is. And I would suggest that the things like the train derailings and attacks on food processing centers and the like, and probably those fires in California, although who knows which side that warfare was conducted by, those all seem to be acts of kinetic warfare. And then we can just drop to the kinetic elements of this irregular warfare. Is it kinetic warfare to have criminal cartels bring massive quantities of deadly drugs into American communities, destabilizing those communities, making it so that the members of those communities cannot be productive members of our societies, not only doing good things for the communities they're in and society as a whole, but themselves to live productive and happy lives? I would suggest that that is part of irregular warfare. The propaganda being fed into the country all the time on behalf of the American Uniparty, the foreign occupying government of this country, on behalf of that global regime, that's anti-American warfare, irregular warfare, psychological warfare, information warfare being waged against us. And so the idea that the president wouldn't be able to have final authority on delineating who was a participant in this incursion, in this invasion, in this act of warfare is insane. A district judge can thwart the president's determination on who is conducting war with the United States of America? That doesn't make any sense at all. There's no way that, can anyone imagine? I would love to hear a case made. Maybe there is a case. And I'm not saying that I'm like the foremost expert on what the founders thought for certain, but is there any case that could possibly be made that they would want a judge in an office they never created to be able to tell the president, no, this particular person, this particular alien, and it is an alien, okay? It's whether it's illegal or legal, whether they're here on a temporary visa, a work visa, H-1B, green card, whatever it is, they're not American, so that makes them an alien. The idea that a judge gets to overrule the president on who is waging warfare against the United States of America, that's not something that the founders could have possibly wanted to see occur down the line. It's a patently ridiculous argument on its face. And this is, again, a matter of whether or not the judge can become the final authority on how the president goes about doing his job and executing his role as commander in chief in protecting the security of the nation. And it's also a question about judicial review. Let us continue with another Kyle Cheney highlight here. Boasberg agrees Trump is owed great deference to invoke the AEA, but did he? But says deportees must have a real chance to argue they are not subject to Trump's proclamation and a chance to contest incarceration in El Salvador, where there is a quote unquote likelihood of potential torture. So that at least is, at least there are some interesting practical issues when it comes to an illegal alien or not, just some alien designated under the Alien Enemies Act to then be shipped to a third country where they are then imprisoned. Is that acceptable? An interesting question. It may come into play with war on terror stuff and post 9/11 stuff as that begins to unravel, because people were qualified, designated as terrorists in the wake of 9/11, sent down to Guantanamo Bay, and then summarily tortured. And we heard arguments for why it was okay to torture them. We were told that the torture led to the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden, blah, 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 blah. It's so silly. Zero Dark 30, the episode Burning Bright and I did on that. Can Khan joined us, former Marine, for that discussion. And we talked about that issue at great length. So I would suggest checking that out if you're interested. But you can see the parallels. They're designated as terrorists. They're captured for whatever reason, sent to Guantanamo Bay, and then tortured. If it's wrong to do that for these criminal aliens, as Trump designates them, sending them to El Salvador, where they might be tortured, if that's wrong, what does it mean for these post 9/11 issues? I remember that was, 20 years ago, that was one of the main controversies and scandals in the United States of America, whether or not it was acceptable to waterboard terrorists. And it was just basically like one of those virtue signaling displays about whether we were going to be tough or whether we weren't going to be tough. And, All right. So we will continue to monitor how all of this evolves from here. I love the opportunity this is providing to be very clear. I mean, we can be mad at judges, which is just really us being mad at the television, believing that this guy is threatening our national security. I don't think he is currently threatening our individual national security. I don't know what to say about the Tren de Aragua thing, but again, Maduro makes it quite clear that in his estimation, Tren de Aragua is a Biden administration supported phenomenon, Biden administration, an FBI and DEA phenomenon, and that these leaders of Tren de Aragua were brought from Venezuela to the United States and held under the administration's protection. So if these were allies of the global regime, assuming that they were actually running this criminal enterprise, this cartel, this terrorist organization on behalf of the global regime, perhaps they are protecting high-ranking officials of that global regime. I'm interested in getting the actual identities of these people and seeing exactly what it is it's claimed they've done. Many more interesting things to be learned here. All right, let us switch subjects to what is currently being called the popularity crisis of the Democrat Party. This is Axios from this morning. Behind the curtain, Dems' dark, deep hole. This is Jim Vandehei and Mike Allen. These guys are the bigwigs at Axios. They started the company. I think they were formerly both of Politico. Top Democrats tell us their party is in its deepest hole in nearly 50 years, and they fear things could actually get worse. The party has its lowest favorability ever. No popular national leader to help improve it. Insufficient numbers to stop most legislation in Congress. A durable minority on the Supreme Court. Dwindling influence over the media ecosystem with right-leaning podcasters and social media accounts ascendant. Young voters are growing dramatically more conservative. A bad 2026 map for Senate races. Democrat Senate retirements could make it harder for the party to flip the House, with members tempted by statewide races. There are only 3 House Republicans in districts won by the former Vice President Kamala. There were 23 8 years ago in seats Hillary Clinton had won. So the idea there is that in these districts that voted, quote unquote, for Kamala in the fake election of 2024, there are only 3 House Republican seats to protect in those pro-Kamala districts, meaning that it would be very hard for them to take seats from Republicans. And thanks to a number of people fleeing blue states, the math for a Dem to win the presidency will just get harder in 2030. And perhaps we'll have a census before then as well. And perhaps there will eventually be adjustments to the census of 2020 that was just poorly done. And in addition to being poorly done, then the result of that was that too many congressional districts were assigned to certain states, which means that they have too many electoral votes as well, and appropriation goes there, etc. The whole thing is a mess. Axios writes, both parties, after losing the White House, Senate, and House, suffer in search for salvation, but rarely does healing seem so hard and redemption so distant. Doug Sosnick, a senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and widely followed thinker on political megatrends, this widely followed thinker apparently still believes elections are real, so thinker should be in quotes, told us this is the Dems' deepest hole in at least the 45 years since Ronald Reagan's victory in 1980. Sosnick said the 2024 election was at least as much a repudiation of Democrats as it was a victory for Trump. And that may well be true, but the scale of the repudiation and Trump's victory are both entirely misrepresented by our fake election results. The repudiation of the Democrats is total. And you can see that even in, and I don't think this is worth nearly the time that's been spent on it, but the woke Snow White movie, quote unquote, it has a person of color playing Snow White who is just an anti-American hater. It's incredible. The movie bombed over the weekend. It made $50 million at the box office on a production budget of around $250 million and probably another 150 or so spent on promotion. So it will potentially never make its money back. That is an absolute disaster. A Disney movie that is trying to reinvigorate one of its franchise tentpoles of the last, 60 years? When was the original Snow White made? In the 60s? 50s maybe? I don't know. Could have been before. I guess now we have to look it up now that I'm talking about it. Why would I not just give the correct information when it is so easily at my access? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Wow. 1937. Blew me away. I had no idea. Okay. So they are updating a franchise tentpole that has been around for nearly 80 years. And it's been an absolute failure. And that suggests that people are sick of this sort of cinematic fare because they're sick of the politics that go behind it. And that is one of those kind of indirect proofs of the size of Trump's mandate and the total absence of any support for Democrat initiatives. Ezra Klein, back to Axios. As Ezra Klein noted this month in his New York Times column, if current population patterns hold, Democrats will suffer a devastating blow after the 2030 census. The party will lose as many as a dozen House seats and electoral votes. And that could happen also just based on the fact that the census counts whoever's here, even if they are illegal aliens. And if that case that Trump has pressed in the courts for years now, if that whole 2020 issue, we find out at some point when Trump's away after this 5-year pause period, then if illegal immigrants aren't counted in the census and electoral college votes and congressional seats and appropriations aren't allotted on the basis of the presence of millions and millions of illegal aliens, well, then they're not going to have any choice. The population of states like California, and by the way, the population of Texas would drop by a lot, but the population of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas would all drop by a lot. Population of Florida would probably drop by a lot. And of course, the global slave trade might have the illegal aliens entering through the southern border, but then they are picked up by NGOs and distributed all around the country to wherever their indentured servitude is requested and required by corporate America. Very, very sick program we've got going on here. But that's why the population would drop. It's not that everybody is leaving California for red states, though that's also true. I'm one of those people. That's just the only way that the mainstream can explain the phenomenon that will occur. Klein points out that in the Electoral College, Dems could win all the states Harris carried, plus Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and still lose the White House. That's how much the difference would be after that 2030 census, assuming it was done in a real way. Democrats' dismal reality is not Republican spin. In fact, there's broad consensus among Democrat leaders that most current political, cultural, media, and generational trends are cutting against them. Democrats are losing working class voters. Klein, co-author with Derek Thompson of the new liberal blueprint, Abundance, said last week they're seeing their margins among non-white voters erode and vanish. They're losing young voters. Something is wrong with the Democrat Party. And Derek Thompson, it's notable, is a writer for The Atlantic and was a major COVID cuck in 2020, like unbelievably so. The maskies and the vaxies don't know what happened. About all of mainstream media, you could apply the standard of you sound vaccinated and be absolutely right in every case. These people have absolutely nothing. Now, that said, when people leave the control of the central narrative, they can either reject the central narrative, reject the party of false decorum, move outside that, represent their personal principles, America First principles, a connection with reality, etc., or they can continue to respond to the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum and simply switch from the central narrative to the central counter narrative. The central counter narrative is Ben Shapiro's diner. It's that mainstream media on the right, quote unquote, which is also just the left, that captures their attention and says, perfect, you figured out that the other side is wrong. Welcome to the side that's not wrong. And of course, that's just the controlled opposition. And they are still wrong. And as I said, they are still leftist. And we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. But let's take a look at their supposed popularity. Now, we remember the popularity of Kamala during her fake election campaign last year. And I really want to find one of these videos now that I'm thinking about it. Here we are. At least this is an image from the fake campaign last year. You'll remember that Kamala Harris, or at least we were told, was doing these campaign events by kind of hitchhiking on board concerts held by popular musical acts, like this one from Bon Iver in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is where they are from. So Bon Iver has a show, and then Kamala Harris appears and does a few minutes of being Kamala. Like, her entire speech was the same at essentially every quote unquote rally she did. And it was like 16 minutes long. She didn't even talk about anything. She just regurgitated the same slogans and then left. And the crowd was always a factor of Bon Iver performing, or Megan Thee Stallion performing, or Beyonce Knowles coming to speak and then not perform, even though the crowd was led to believe that Beyonce would perform. So she kind of just staged these events. And throughout that entire time, Tony Saruga was also tracking, and, you know, take it for what it's worth. I cannot independently confirm his information, but he was tracking the cell phones that would attend these Kamala events. And we discussed how the same people would attend each of these events all around the country. The idea being that they were probably having their trips sponsored to all of these various locations and then being paid some sort of small stipend to appear at these rallies. It would make total sense. If you want 5,000 people to attend a political rally where you could commonly only attract 200 or 300 people, which is the reality of the Kamala campaign, would it be worth $1,000 for each person to attend that event? Can you get a $250 plane ticket or whatever it is, or $500 round trip or what have you, to fly someone to a location, put them up in a hotel for a night for $80 and pay them $100 to attend the rally? If they're a huge Kamala Harris supporter, a Trump deranged liberal, they would totally do that. Why wouldn't they do that? Free trip to another town around the country. All your expenses for that trip are paid, and you get $100 for your time to go and see the future first Black female president speak, and you get entertained. You get a concert. I think a lot of people would take that deal, and I think that that's exactly how that campaign operated. And considering that they were funded and supported by the wealthy philanthropists, the actual oligarch class, it would be then no surprise for them to, who also, by the way, control the dollar bill printing press. It would be no surprise at all that they were paying $5 million, $1,000 each to get 5,000 people to an event. Or maybe they just pay more for the people in that particular location. Donald Trump is able to draw thousands and thousands of people spontaneously wherever he goes. The Kamala campaign was never able to draw more than a few hundred, except in these massive events, these concerts, these major rallies. I need to send myself an image that I forgot to put onto my desktop to use here. So hold temporarily for processing. There we are. All set. We're all better. Now let's continue. So over the weekend, in fact, let's start the story just back a few weeks ago. This is from the 10th of March in Breitbart. Trans rocker Laura Jane Grace slammed for pure evil lyrics at Bernie Sanders rally. Does your God have a big fat D? Here is said tranny. Socialist Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has shocked many for including a transgender punk rocker in his rally who belted out a song containing offensive lyrics. The Sanders rally, which drew about 3,500 attendees, occurred in Somers, Wisconsin on Friday, where Sanders, who is working to become the face of Trump resistance, invited punker Laura Jane Grace, the transgender head of the band Against Me, to perform for the left-wing crowd. And I won't read some of the other comments, or I should say statements from that rocker. If you watch the video version, you can see them in the article. If you'd like to know what else it said, go to that article in Breitbart. And so with that in mind, Bernie has been holding rallies for a few weeks now. Here is Bernie's post on X, formerly Twitter, from Saturday. Actually, let's go. Bernie says, the video speaks for itself. 34,000 people out in Denver, largest political rally there since 2008. The message is clear. No to authoritarianism. No to oligarchy. No to Trumpism. We are ready to fight back. Now it's on to Tucson. So one might wonder, why is Bernie Sanders holding rallies in March of 2025? The Trump administration is, what do we say, 64 days old? So there's essentially still all 4 years left. And Bernie Sanders, along with AOC, are trying to take the lead in the anti-Trump, quote unquote, resistance. Here's video. Here's the video that Bernie posted. Let's go ahead and speed this up a bit. So we have this. That is a large crowd. I don't know if it's 34,000 large, but it's certainly a large crowd. That is Trump-esque or Trumpian, or however you might like to say it. Let's get a couple more angles here and then we'll do away with this video. So a lot of people out to see old Bernie Sanders. Here is Tony Saruga on X, formerly Twitter. Here we go again. There were 20,189 devices. Still a large crowd, but not even close to the 30,000 quoted in Denver newspapers, nor the 34,000 quoted by Bernie Sanders and AOC. 84% of the devices present had attended 9 or more Kamala Harris rallies. Antifa, BLM, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests. 31% had attended over 20. So let's just be clear, because his wording is a little awkward there. 84% of the devices present had attended 9 or more Kamala Harris rallies. And in addition, Antifa and BLM, or pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian protests. 31% had attended over 20. Okay? So the same people are showing up for all of these different events. It's the same little pack of protesters, all these people organized from the top down, well-funded. This is not grassroots. This is the opposite of grassroots. This is antithetical to what Bernie Sanders used to portray himself to be. But of course, the way he used to portray himself to be was also a complete and total lie. For more insight into what data we look at, in addition to GPS location data, would be demographic and psychographic data using over 6,000 different databases, like the Bureau for Labor Statistics, Pew Research Center, market research firms like YouGov, Experian, specialized tools like ESRI's Tapestry segmentation, consumer surveys, social media platforms like X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Demographic data includes basic characteristics like age, gender, income, education level, occupation, marital status, family size, ethnicity, and where people live, for example, city and state. Psychographic data dives deeper into people's lifestyles, values, attitudes, interests, personality traits, social class, activities, and how they make purchasing decisions. For example, it might show if someone values sustainability, enjoys outdoor activities, participates in community activism. While demographic data is straightforward, psychographic data can reveal sensitive personal details like beliefs, even life goals. Additionally, by cross-pollinating each device with other devices regularly within close proximity to the target device, we are able to build a detailed profile for each target. 90% of those in the above 84%, so that's the big group that were at least 9 of those events, the rallies, the various protests, Antifa, BLM, etc. We're likely working with one of these 5 groups, and that is the reason for their presence. Once again, this is based on a very sophisticated algorithm that looks at the behavioral metrics for each device, including the physical one-to-one proximity to leaders and paymasters from these groups in the past. These groups include the Disruption Project, Rise and Resist, Indivisible Project, Troublemakers, and the Democrat Socialists of America. So Indivisible, we've talked about quite a bit recently because they're the people who are going to the various town halls and causing disruptions at the town halls. And I mentioned in the episode after the speech before the joint session of Congress, the Good Trouble t-shirts. Well, that's the troublemakers that they're referring to right here. I'm pretty certain that's it. Check me if I'm wrong. Each receives money from Act Blue and at least 3 via USAID. So Act Blue is the front for how they launder these donations, and the donations are often laundered through the names of unsuspecting Americans or just, made up Americans who are on file with one of these organizations, whether it's the voter registration databases or social security databases or whatever. So Act Blue will take money from these philanthropists and oligarchs and then launder it through people's names so that it comes through and is recorded as small dollar donations. Okay. And we talked a few weeks ago about how the small dollar donations were decreasing for Democrats because they would have to decrease if the Act Blue scam gets exposed. And there's a good possibility that the Sam Bankman-Fried thing coincides exactly with this. And as that thing is exposed, as it's brought down and dismantled, that option's not going to be there anymore. So then they move to saying, oh, well, we're going to get these large dollar donations now instead. So it's that's partial funding. Then they're saying, Saruga is saying, other funding is coming from USAID. And so that is partially, at least, supposedly American taxpayer dollars being directed by the American government to fund leftist activist organizations, creating the illusion of popularity for Democrat socialists and these community organized communists. It really is incredible stuff. Disruption Project, legal status unclear, likely operating illegally. Rise and Resist is a 501c4 nonprofit. Indivisible is a 501c4 nonprofit. Troublemakers legal status is for profit, and Democrat Socialists of America, another 501c4 nonprofit. So, what are they doing here? They are creating the illusion of popularity. And let's just hammer this home. Here is Bernie Sanders, the self-imagined independent, answering what he thinks Donald Trump is doing well.
Is there anything that you think Trump has done right?
Yeah, I think cracking down on fentanyl, making sure our borders are stronger. Look, nobody thinks illegal immigration is appropriate.
Is there anything that you think?
Nobody thinks illegal immigration is appropriate? Well, that's relatively new. Now, it's less new for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has always given lip service to pushing back on illegal immigration, and he portrays himself as a populist who actually cares about people. And so he can easily score points mentioning the fentanyl crisis. Does Bernie Sanders and his political movement actually support the deportation of illegal immigrants? No, but he wants more help at the border. And so does the rest of the Uniparty. They want the unipartisan border legislation passed. That's what they wanted last year when the media decided to finally admit that illegal immigration was a problem in the United States of America. And so now Bernie's using that to portray himself as a more centrist kind of Democrat, so that those people who voted for Trump this time but aren't really in love with Trump, maybe they'll have another option in Bernie Sanders. Oh, hey, don't worry. I know you don't like illegal immigration. I'm happy to take care of that for you. As long as you let me install the rest of my socialist agenda, like universal health care. The government would run everything, and that's what Bernie wants. I love the people who say, oh, he's just a democratic socialist. I had to deal with Hollywood doing this from 2016 on. I was already a bad guy there for not supporting Bernie. You have to understand that that is what makes you a good person. You can't be a good person if you're not supporting actual socialism and communism in America. It really is incredible. Let us pause here briefly. I'm just taking a look at the chat here. Okay, now, steel yourselves. This here is Rosie O'Donnell.
You know, a lot of people did vote for him.
Yes.
Do you accept their right to do that and their opinion of him?
Well, I respect their right to do that. I question why the first time in American history a president has won every swing state and is also best friends, and his largest donor was a man who owns and runs the internet. So I would hope that that would be investigated and that we would see whether or not it was an anomaly or something else that happened on election night in America when Kamala Harris was filling up stadiums with people who supported her, and Donald Trump was not able to do that. So it's curious to me. And as an American and a believer in democracy, I would hope that we would be able to look at all of the reasons why this happened.
That's impressive. You got to say, that's impressive. Is anyone calling her a conspiracy theorist? Well, we might. I don't think the mainstream media is out there pushing back on Rosie O'Donnell, though I haven't looked, to be fair. She is saying that Kamala Harris was drawing those massive crowds and Donald Trump was not able to do that. Well, that's preposterous. No one could possibly ever believe that. There are people, absolutely, I'm not questioning that, people believe that Kamala Harris had massive organic rallies like we just went through, courtesy of Beyonce Knowles and Megan Thee Stallion and Bon Iver and others. Donald Trump has had the biggest rallies that we've ever seen in American politics for the last 10 years. And if he had one today, it would be a big rally. He could do a rally next month in any city. You could go to Los Angeles. You could go to he could go to outside San Francisco. Any liberal bastion in America, Trump could go there and still draw 30, 40, 50,000 plus with a few days notice, because people actually care about Donald Trump. People actually support Donald Trump. So that notion from Rosie O'Donnell is ridiculous. The illusion of popularity, apparently it's working on her. I doubt that it is working on anyone else. Let's continue with the illusion of popularity here. Actually, you know what? Let's go back. I just want to hear one more thing in that Rosie bit. I wanted to make one more point. And
owner was a man who owns and runs the internet.
Ah, yes, that was it. The man who owns and runs the internet. That's quite a way of describing Elon Musk. He does have X, formerly Twitter, and he does have Starlink. So at some point in the fairly near future, it might be the case that he does own and run the internet, at least insofar as he is a Defense Department contractor who is the public-facing owner and director of these various Defense Department-linked companies that were started by the Defense Department. So it's really just the U.S. government owns the internet. The U.S. government owns X, formerly Twitter. The U.S. government owns the next generation energy infrastructure, next generation battery infrastructure, Tesla, the AI that operates the self-driving cars. And we might get to some of the self-driving stuff later on because the competition from China's BYD is becoming greater, or Elon is pulling back from those Chinese interests. There was an article in The Economist to that effect. But let's stick with the topic of the popularity crisis and the illusion of popularity. We've talked a bit about the influencer class online. My pal Jordan Sather posted this over the weekend. Yesterday afternoon, a bunch of conservative influencers all posted in defense of keeping soda on taxpayer-funded SNAP programs, all about the same time in unison. Nick Sorter and others pointed out that these influencers are being offered upwards of $1,000 per post to shill for these soda companies. Coke earns a few $1 billion per year from soda being allowed to get bought with SNAP money. Big incentive for them to lobby. Some of these influencers will do anything for a buck. Our tax money shouldn't be allowing people to purchase shit soda and GMO poison products. And I agree with him that to the extent government money is being doled out to people on welfare and food stamps, it certainly shouldn't be doled out to then funnel it back to the Coca-Cola Corporation or Nestle or any of these other massive corporate conglomerates who control the food supply. It shouldn't be used for things like cigarettes. It should be used for food, especially food that is fresh and then might spoil, so that the inventory is used rather than wasted. I mean, what an absolute breakdown. What an utter abomination of that system in the first place. Again, I don't think that that money should be going out. If it does go out at all, that should be decided on a state and local level in churches or whatever. If people want to donate to charity, to start a food program so that people can have their ability to buy food supplemented in some way, or they have a cheap food option or a free food option. Okay. We can, as a society, figure out ways to help the indigent, but it doesn't need to be the federal government giving them money. So that aside, here are some influencers that were noted. Eric Doherty, who is a rather prominent, quote unquote, conservative influencer. Important, with a siren, of course. We cannot allow Make America Healthy Again messaging to be used to force needy Americans into not buying certain things. Some officials in D.C. are working on trying to prevent Americans on SNAP from using those benefits to purchase any soda. What's conservative about that? Ian Miles Chong, one of the worst people on the internet, said, I, for one, think you should be able to buy cigarettes with SNAP. Said a new war on soda has begun, targeting purchases made through SNAP. I don't believe it's the government's role to decide what people should or shouldn't eat. Jenna Ellis, Ron DeSantis operator, who still has her retarded little alligator in her Twitter profile. Efforts to restrict SNAP purchases takes away the autonomy of the consumer to make their own decisions. And it goes on with the Clown World account and the Not Jerome Powell account. And these are the sorts of accounts that people on X, formerly Twitter, and quote unquote right-wing news outlets and MAGA supporters will constantly repost and constantly reference. These are the people delivering the really pro-MAGA slogans every day. They're not conservative incorporated. They're pure MAGA. They're getting the word out. And we all have to support one another. We have to agree with one another and never call one another out, or we might threaten unity. And don't you know that where we go one, we go all? And because of that, if you want to misinterpret those kinds of things, because of that, we are told that you can't actually call out even atrocious anti-conservative, anti-MAGA, anti-American messaging and behavior. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to call out the paid messaging operations, apparently. You're not allowed to call out when people are just blatantly grifting online, operating in these little circles of influencers where they all agree to just repost each other's stuff all day long so that they can seem like they are the popular accounts representing an actual consensus, creating the illusion of consensus and creating the idea that this circle is somehow authoritative and should be more respected. They all know that all of them are just the best. And I posted this over the weekend. Some of you may have seen it. I would suggest that this could be, and I believe is, as effective as You Sound Vaccinated was, just a humble attention farmer. This here attention farmer standing out, toiling in his field, collecting all of these likes, these little hearts, likes and follows. The attention farmer's toiling away, hoping to score social credit points in the form of likes and follows. One day, hopefully, being able to collect regime fiat tokens for influencing as hard as they can a bountiful harvest. And that's what these people are. They are attention farmers. They are producing clickbait. They're producing clickbait every day, information, their posts, whatever it is, not maximized for truth or its informative nature or its honesty or its principles or even to support Trump and the cause. It's just to exploit whatever the day's trends are. And we have been led into the belief that the 4 a.m. talking points only go out to leftist media organizations, that they only go out to CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post and Politico and to the leftist influencers online. They're the ones doing the 4 a.m. talking points. These people who say nice things about Donald Trump, they're not part of coordinated messaging ops like that. That's for the mainstream media, not Fox News and the Daily Weimar. But of course, that's exactly what it is. And you can see right there that that's exactly what it is. They are being paid to post things that they don't even understand are antithetical to MAGA principles, to America First principles, to American foundational principles like liberty and self-governance and diligence and individuality and responsibility. None of that. All of that is irrelevant. They stand to make a little money. They can get some regime fiat tokens for being such good influencers, for being such quality attention farmers and farming that attention so hard. Here is the site that coordinates this, influenceable.io. Okay, you can go check this site out for yourself. Unlock the power of influence. Join the world's largest network of digital activists. Okay, and keep an eye on this down here, Nucleus. Okay, that is their partner. Influenceable. Get paid for being yourself. Huh. Isn't that amazing? You can get paid for being yourself. You did this great job in farming all this attention. Now you've got this following. You just get paid to just keep doing what you're doing as long as it's exactly what we say you should be doing. So you're going to be yourself. We're going to give you what to say, and then you're going to put out the message. Now, how about this? See this right here in the bottom left corner of this little mobile phone graphic? That right there is one Rogan O'Handley. That's DC Drano. DC Drano, that based and red-pilled influencer who I'm consistently told is fighting for us. He was one of the guys in the Epstein files op a few weeks ago who got totally rugged, who was showing off his Epstein files binder that contained absolutely nothing. He and his little influencer pals, libs of TikTok, and Mike Cernovich, and what's her name? Liz something. It's impossible to keep these retards in mind. They're just so worthless. So these people are profiting by lying to you. And they would say that they're not lying. They would say that they actually align with these beliefs. They thought that it was a good argument, that pro-snap argument, for instance, and that it's just how the game works. It's their job to be influencers, and they're just doing their job. That's the job. Their job is to lie to you for money, just like Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper. And we pretend, no, that's not true. We are the news now. These are just independent influencers saying all the based and red-pilled things because they actually believe them. No, they don't. They're using your belief structure as a money printer, essentially. And I'm divisive for pointing this out, of course. I actually had an attention farmer come at me over the weekend. Isn't this what Badlands does? No, it's not. No one pays us for our opinions unless they choose to advertise their products on Badlands, or unless it's you, the audience, providing us with financial support. That's where all the money comes from. There's no other money there. And people think we're like getting rich on it. It's crazy. So this company, Influenceable, does all these various services. You can sign up. You're already a trendsetter, a game changer, a force to be reckoned with. But what if we told you there's more? With our insider connections and industry experience, you can take your influence to new heights. Get started. Up 404. Now, I don't know if the website just shit the bed over the weekend, but that ain't good. Now, speaking of influenceable, it apparently is closely linked to former Trump advisor Brad Parscale. Now, Parscale's been a controversial figure at various points, and I don't know whether he's a good guy or a bad guy or what, and I don't care. This here is the Texas Tribune, okay? So be warned, this is a commie rag. This reporter has an extreme leftist bias. This is just information among other information. The headline from August of 2023, Gen Z influencers quietly recruited by a company with deep GOP ties rally to impeached Ken Paxton's aide. Okay? So, is it possible that these influence organizations are occasionally supporting good causes? And I believe the anti-impeachment effort for Ken Paxton was a good cause. I like Ken Paxton. I think Ken Paxton's a good man. I'm open to being wrong about that, but I think he's a good man. So they have photos from an event that show Influenceable has powerful allies, they say. Among the speakers were Brad Parscale, who recently moved to Texas after years running the Trump campaign's digital strategy, and Tim Dunn, the West Texas oil tycoon who has given tens of millions of dollars to ultra-conservative movements and candidates in Texas, including Paxton. Okay, so that's a little guilt by association there. Skip down. Influenceable is closely linked to another right-wing organization, Today is America Incorporated, a self-described anti-woke social media company that was founded in 2019 by North Carolina brothers Cameron and Liam Rafizadeh. The company quickly rose to prominence on platforms such as Instagram, where it continues to deluge its 250,000 followers with anti-LGBTQ plus memes and pro-Trump talking points. Okay? And fine. Liam Rafizadeh also ran well-known Republican Hype House account on TikTok. And they mentioned a couple other influencers in here, including CJ Pearson and people linked to, as you see, MTG, George Santos, RFK Jr. So it is a pretty wide-ranging social media influence operation. And you can have your own feelings about that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. None of these influencers ever tell you that they are getting paid to put out certain posts. Because if they started telling people that, the people would immediately stop trusting them. That's the problem, okay? Now, again, I used to be a partner at a social media management company that represented brands and celebrities in social media. So I've seen this system operate now since, I think that started in 2016, 2017. And we weren't in politics. We were just, and occasionally there would be political advertisers that would want to like support a cause, but it wasn't really directly ever politics if my memory serves. It was basically like, we want this celebrity to represent this line of shoes or makeup or handbags, and we have $5,000 to pay. We want this messaging done. We want the celebrity doing their makeup in the video they take where they're talking about the product, that kind of thing. All right. And I think to most people, that level of brand marketing is pretty easily recognizable. And it's entirely possible that they are representing a product that they actually can get behind, which makes it okay. If somebody uses makeup products, I don't have any problem with that person getting paid to tell other people, hey, I like these makeup products. It's okay to market things. I don't have a problem with that. But we are led to believe that these people are actually representing themselves and that they are doing it on behalf of the America First movement and on behalf of Donald Trump. So it's clear they're not doing that, or they're not always doing that. And if they're not always doing that, how are we going to know when they are or when they aren't? And I guess it's kind of impossible to know that. But we can tell that they are maximizing for virality. They're maximizing for attention and clickbait. They're maximizing the daily trends. And let's look at some DC Drano posts. Like, let's just have a look and see how the attention farm operates. Here is today. A lot of people are waking up to the truth that CIA helped orchestrate regime change right here in America in 2020. COVID, BLM riots, stolen election, the J6 trap. It was a color revolution right here at home, and they almost got away with it. Now it's our turn. Okay, where were you the last 4 years? Remember when Obama mocked Trump for wanting to bring back manufacturing jobs? Some of those jobs are not coming back. What magic wand do you have? Turns out Trump does have a magic wand to bring $3 trillion in jobs to America. It's called a tariff. Okay, Drano. Now, are those posts pro-Trump? Yes. Are they pro-MAGA? Sure. They're aligned with MAGA interests at least. Are they attempting to appeal to a huge audience of people so that they will be shared despite the fact that they are mundane, milquetoast comments that people have made for years and years while being barred from the conversation in which these influencers who are getting paid are amplified. And what does it mean that they're not only getting paid for the virality and popularity of their posts on X, formerly Twitter, but they are getting paid directly in cash to push certain messages? Are they getting paid for those messages? Is Drano getting paid for those messages? I would say probably not those ones. And those are the ones that support the platform broadly. That causes people to retruth those posts, to take them over to other platforms. He's probably posting the same exact thing on X. He's posting the same on Instagram, etc. And so he becomes seen as a very relevant and popular voice within the movement, despite him not being a thought leader, not actually influencing anyone. It's just normie fare. And you do that with 50 influencers or 100 influencers or 500 influencers or 1,000, and the messaging is coordinated from the top. And well, then you have the illusion of consensus across MAGA that this particular position is the right one. And that matters when you're trying to figure out whether they are supporting controlled opposition dynamics, uniparty right messaging campaigns, or whether they're actually supporting MAGA. And it turns out they're always supporting controlled opposition dynamics that are aligned with MAGA, okay? But they're not MAGA. And that is one of the most important things to remember about that Ron DeSantis op. And I've suggested many times in the last few weeks, go back to an episode called Aligned Interests if you want to hear further argument on that. These people, like from the Daily Weimar and the Blaze and Town Hall, etc., who are vehemently anti-Trump in 2015 and 2016, and then as soon as Trump's the nominee, then they're super pro-Trump. And while Trump's in office, they're sometimes Trump. They say when Trump's doing a bad job, when Trump's not doing the things that they want him to be doing, and then the rest of the time, they're totally pro-Trump. So they are aligned with MAGA occasionally. And when they are, then they're totally pro-MAGA so that we see them as aligned with us. And then when their interests are not aligned, when Trump is doing anti-globalist things, anti-uniparty things, complaining about our fake elections, for instance, not following the prescribed COVID protocols, then they veer off. Then they are anti-Trump. And then as soon as Trump is, quote unquote, out of office, well, now they're just full-time anti-Trump again. And they're vehemently anti-Trump as soon as they get the option of supporting Ron DeSantis. And then when that doesn't work and Trump's the nominee again in the fake election, the fake campaign before the fake election, well, then they're pro-Trump again. And now that everybody likes Trump and the Trump agenda, now they're pro-Trump, except when he's not doing the right thing, and then they're criticizing again. And so we've seen the exact same dynamics and exact same behavior patterns from these people operating in rotation for the last 10 years. Always in line with the uniparty right, with the controlled opposition, occasionally aligned with MAGA, and always catering their messaging to MAGA so as not to offend too much that we would ever think, oh, they're actually not good conservatives. But they're not. They're just statists. They are supporters of the uniparty. Now, it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine today who hosts a pretty sizable podcast in the conservative/truth space. And he said, oh, yeah, I used to get those text messages from Influenceable all the time. They would ask me to promote Daily Wire messaging. Daily Wire messaging. So the Daily Weimar, this massive, well-funded mainstream media network, has paid influencer operations where money is sent out to this network of influencers so that they will push Daily Weimar messaging. Ben Shapiro's diner is being spoon-fed to MAGA, who continues to believe that these people are our allies. And guess who else does that sort of thing? Well, we can look at the influencer network. Who are those influencers? Who is DC Drano? An influencer in whose network, I should say? Well, that's Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. Most of these mainstream conservative, quote unquote, based in red-pilled influencers who are always schlepping the same messaging are all TP USA people. Now, is Charlie Kirk having engaging, influenceable to operate this network? I don't know. Okay. I have no idea. I would suspect that's probably the case, but I don't know. And I will look more for that information. If anyone has information on that, by all means, go ahead and send it over. Now, if that is just a coincidental relationship that quote unquote influencers like DC Drano are in Turning Point USA and in Influenceable, fine. If the Daily Weimar doesn't have a regular engagement with Influenceable to continually advertise their Ben Shapiro's Diner messaging, their 24/7 trans content from Matt Walsh, fine. But this is how social media operates, and this is how the new mainstream media operates. This isn't the new independent media. This isn't We Are the News now, because they're not we. They're just a different kind of mainstream media, which is why in the aftermath of the fake 2024 election and Trump's inauguration, the New York Times published an article about how Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk have taken over the young voter. Where is this article? I really do want to find this. Hold for processing. The Brave browser, by the way, has a new feature where you can, hold on a second. I'm going to try another search. A new feature where you can choose that you want news from the right or news from the left. And I've been playing with that feature a little bit. And it's incredible because they have the Bulwark, a Never Trump outlet, featured as from the right. It's hilarious. All of this is just so nuts. Anyhow, maybe this is, I thought for sure I'd be able to find that relatively quickly. Hold for processing. I hate doing this, but I really would like to find this. I know it's from, when is it from? Maybe it's all the way back from November. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's maybe just right from after the election. Pardon. We're so close. I can feel it. I can feel it coming in the air tonight. No, I can't. All right. I guess I'm just going to, oh, here we are. Oh, here we are. Wonderful. Wunderbar. Sorry, I just saw Inglourious Bastards last week. Here's the article. Republicans built an ecosystem of influencers. Some Democrats want one too. The New York Times on November 28th, 2024. And they talked about how Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk had created this new network. There's Charlie. This new conservative influence network that won Donald Trump the fake election. There was no chance of Donald Trump losing that fake election, first and foremost, because it was fake. And second, because there's no way that the regime could have ever sold to the American public that Kamala Harris was more popular than Donald Trump, even in the swing states or any of the rest of it. There was never any chance of that. And I talked about it on this podcast for a year in advance. And I said, they're going to have to say that Donald Trump won. And what they're going to do is steal races, down ballot and at the local level, and then tell us that Trump only won by a little bit because people were really upset with Joe Biden. And then the subversion of the Trump administration will begin, and we will have tons of uniparty right rhinos in government. Well, my friends, where are we right now? Turns out we're exactly there. This is the Hollywood Reporter with a picture of Ben Shapiro from January 13th of this year, how Ben Shapiro conquered the MAGAverse. Isn't that amazing? Ben Shapiro conquered the MAGAverse? I didn't see that happen. How did it happen? So influencer networks, paid influencer networks, these are supposed to be our heroes. These are the people we are supposed to follow, and we are supposed to unify around and behind them. While they are pitching paid messaging campaigns that directly conflict with MAGA and the MAGA agenda, the America First agenda, and more importantly, the people's agenda. This stuff is in direct violation to core principles, and it doesn't matter at all, because all the people online who create the public perception, who form the illusion of consensus, pitch the same messaging the same day because they're paid to pitch it. The people are going to believe what the people are going to believe. And it is unfortunate that people think they have stopped watching the mainstream media while they're still just watching the mainstream media from different screens on their computer, on their cell phone. Different characters. Actually, most of the time, it's the same characters. Tucker Carlson on his show is not different than Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Glenn Beck and the rest of them on The Blaze are not different than they were on Fox News. Dan Bongino on his podcast was not different than Dan Bongino on Fox News. Ben Shapiro and all those guys, that's just mainstream uniparty media. If people continue to believe that these are our allies and that they are leading the charge, we are going to stay here forever. All they have to do is outlast 4 years of Donald Trump, as they did a few years ago, and then just shift public perception and public consensus back in their direction. And you can see them doing it. We can just watch the operation. It's like a peek behind the curtain. Look what they're doing. And everybody's like, well, yeah, but they're doing it to help us. Okay. If you say so. We've replaced the bad liars with the good liars. All right. So Eric Doherty followed up that Nick Sorter post with his own post yesterday. Yeah, that was dumb of me. Massive egg on my face. In all seriousness, it won't happen again. It will happen again. These people excuse this behavior continuously because, quote unquote, it's their job. It will absolutely happen again. It will happen again and again and again and again and again, because this is what they do. Let's pause for a brief word from Positive. If you have a dog, we've all been there. Our pup goes from full of energy to sick and miserable in an instant, and at the worst times. Then we're calling vets in the middle of the night or on weekends trying to find a clinic that will take us in. It's a terrible way to manage our dog's health, not to mention our stress levels and our monthly budget. And every time I do this ad, I talk about my little dog and how I trust vets about as much as I trust doctors, which is to say, I don't trust them at all. And I would never entrust my dog's health to someone who stays in business by forcing vaccinations on people's animals. And so that is why I think this is great. So you can operate with your dog's health the same way I operate with my own health, which is try to do all the right things. And if I'm going to need pharmaceuticals. Find another way to get them. That's why people are getting Pet Emergency Kit, the Pet Emergency Kit by Positive. It contains critical medications and supplies that can not only keep you out of the veterinary office, but even save your dog's life. Their kits contain critical medications like activated charcoal, styptic powder, and more. It might save your dog's life. Head on over to positive.com and use code STUDIO to get 15% off your Pet Emergency Kit. So Positive, P-A-W, Sativ.com. And as always, these ads are in support of the Rumble platform, a platform that has helped us maintain our free speech, or some semblance of our free speech, over the last few years. And so good to support free speech, good to support Rumble, and good to support our furry little friends in places that they can be safe, like our homes. Polymathanon in the chat says, my wife is a vet, but she does no vaccines. Cheers to you, my friend. Those are very, very hard to find. And unfortunately, it is always a matter of the states putting in regulations and licensing codes that force vets to give animals vaccines, even if they don't want to. And so if they were to just go against that, they are then putting their ability to operate at risk. And, you know, we saw how that worked with humans in 2020. Not a great thing. Okay. Let us continue. Now, I posted this the other day, and I think it's important to just use as a reminder. And I don't, you know what? Let's skip that for now. We'll come back to it, or maybe we'll do it on Wednesday. Let's keep going. The Department of Education. We saw Donald Trump last week sign a presidential action to put into process the winding down and dismantling of the Department of Education. Something that many of us, I believe, maybe all of us, think is a necessary step in removing the federal government's influence from the education of America's children and the indoctrination. Now, I don't have kids, but I went to a public school, and I can attest to the fact that I was thoroughly indoctrinated with a whole bunch of nonsense that takes a long time to actually rid yourself of, to move on into a future where you're not just continuously subject to your indoctrination at every turn. It's a lot of stuff to let go. And then, of course, I had the secondary step of being sent off to, not sent off, I went to a like one of those elite liberal arts colleges where I was thoroughly indoctrinated even more. And so it's difficult to unwind that. It would be better to cut it off at the source. And the source, of course, is the government schools that the majority of the nation's children are sent to. And even if they're not sent to the government indoctrination centers, whatever schools they are sent to are still subject to the same levels of influence. So we are going to strip that influence away to some extent from the federal government. This is a video posted by Donald Trump this morning about Education Secretary Linda McMahon and the effort to remove the Department of Education.
You can ask, why in the world I would want to be the secretary of a department that is going to be done away with, and I'm actually firing myself.
Pleased to be joined today by the woman who I chose because she's an extraordinary person, and hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. Linda, you're presiding over something that's so important, and you're going to do a fantastic job, just like you have your whole life. She's had nothing but success. So hopefully you won't be there too long, but we're going to find something else for you, Linda, okay?
We both believe very much that education should be tailored to communities, that parents should have involvement, that local superintendents are the ones working with our teachers with full transparency of what education curriculum should be. The president signed an executive order to shut down the Department of Education and have me be the last secretary of the Department of Education. The president made very clear that Pell Grants, funding for students with special needs, all of those will continue. But he does believe that we'll be able to operate more efficiently by governors and state departments of education, and superintendents and parents can certainly have more input into the education of their students. I believe that as well.
All right. So, totally good. Totally necessary. I'm glad Trump's doing it. I hope that it causes a fight between the Trump administration and the courts, the Trump administration and the legislative branch about shutting down an entire department, or essentially letting it wither on the vine by the executive branch. As I've said many times, I think that Trump should be able to do that. I think it's totally within his purview, and it should be eliminated. And if they want to bring up a new Department of Education after Trump is gone, and there's an executive that wants a Department of Education, well, then fine, that's probably going to be what happens. But the executive should still have the option not to run an agency that he believes to be subversive to his agenda and to the country at large. And so it's good that Trump is able to do that. Now, there's also the problem that I think a lot of these departments and agencies are just going to continue functioning in some sort of privatized version and still be influencing things on the state level, and then maybe move back into the government if there's a new administration at some point in the future that wants it. I don't think this stuff is going away, and that's why I bring it up, because if the Department of Education goes away at the federal level, that does not just mean that education is fixed at a local and state level, especially because school board members are parts of top-down national organizations that control things and coordinate efforts behind the scenes, like the National Association of School Boards, totally regime uniparty operation, implementing the regime agenda, working behind the scenes, not a secret society, but still not what people think is going on when they elect school board members. And then, of course, the problem is they're not actually electing school board members because the elections are fake. And if they're rigging elections for school board members, they absolutely are doing that, then the federal Department of Education being gone is not going to provide all the solutions. Now, if that federal money gets cut off to implement some of those programs, that money is going to have to then be supplemented in other ways. And that could present issues in the short term for these people. But again, they have access to all the money ultimately, or have. And hopefully we're moving away from that. Maybe it's next week on Liberation Day. We shall see. But we have to address these things down at the local and state level, which means we still have to focus on elections at the local and state level. Otherwise, they're just going to keep running the same programs that they were running from the top down at the federal level. We have this weird tendency, because our media and the social media and all of it is so focused on these national issues, to think that the national level, the federal government level, is where everything is operated and then where everything gets solved. And that's not true, but it's also a mindset that we have to do away with, because that is a statist mindset. It is the understanding that our solutions come from government. They don't come from individuals operating in their own best interests. It's totally centralized and not at all decentralized. Statism is the problem, and the uniparty right are statists. Most of the influencers and most of the media are statists. They still want solutions to come from government. Everything is focused on government. And so let's come back around to that post that I was looking for. Having said that, I put this up on, what was it, Thursday last week? These are collectivist ideologies: communism, socialism, Zionism, fascism, Nazism, state capitalism, that's like China or the CCP model, stakeholder capitalism, that's the World Economic Forum, neoliberalism, which is just Marxism, and neoconservatism, which is just Trotskyism. I said collectivism necessarily represents a centralization. Centralization implies top-down control by a minuscule minority employing the collective power and resources of the whole to their own ends. The urge towards centralization is the key characteristic of the evil twin in the good twin, evil twin model. The good twin is characterized by the urge toward decentralization. Statism is the worship of the top-down command element of the evil twin, placing the state above the individual and the collective of individuals, thereby placing the state above God. And that is where we are in our society, in our culture, and that is where we will remain relative to our schools if we think that the school problem is solved because the federal government, because Donald Trump, with the stroke of a pen, has said we are dismantling the Department of Education. We are shifting various of its services to other departments and agencies, and we are going to end the federal government's push toward social justice and DEI programs. Donald Trump can do what the president can do to fix things. And if Donald Trump as president can't fully fix a problem, then it is not in any way a slight to Donald Trump to say what Trump has done has not fixed this problem. Okay? And we have to be really, really clear about that. President Trump has done exactly what he said he's going to do. And he's doing it well. And the people are liking that he's doing it. He's messaging it well. He's pushing all of this stuff forward. But he can't do this stuff on his own. And to the extent we make him do it on his own, because we ourselves are statists and grovelers who assume the president is going to solve everything, then we are not helping Donald Trump. We are actually harming him and harming that effort. We are taking that effort and wasting it. Okay? Trump is still out there talking about how elections are fake and stolen. He hasn't backed off that an inch. Where's the rest of the conservative media, quote unquote, the right wing that are really just left wing? If you're neoconservative, if you are a statist, if you are a collectivist of any variety, and some people said I should mention globalism in there too. And I guess globalism implies a collectivist ideology, but it's kind of just the pinnacle organizing principle of collectivist ideologies. Like the zenith of collectivism or apex or whatever would be globalism, would be total top-down control over everything worldwide. And all of these various kind of brands or different varieties of collectivism would be operative in various countries, whatever would apply to each individual location. All of these collectivist ideologies look toward the government as the solution, and the government is not the solution. And if we continue to go along with the statist elements, with the uniparty right elements, and view things as country versus country rather than good twin, evil twin, this Trump effort is going to be wasted over these 4 years. He's going to do absolutely everything he possibly can. And if the people are not driving and motivating that force behind him, if it's only coming from the mainstream media outlets on quote unquote the right, then we're going to be right back in the same place. There's no other way to advance forward beyond that. Let's get through a couple more things, and then we will wrap things up for the day. Okay. Let's go to the New York Times. This is from a week ago, but I thought this was worth highlighting just so that we can remember the effect that the media environment has and had. And this includes, again, many of the so-called influencers on the right. This is the New York Times, March 16th. We were badly misled about the event that changed our lives. This from a woman named Zeynep Tufekci. And okay, I had more highlights than that, but as usual, let's just start at the top and do a few paragraphs, and then we'll jump down to those highlights. Since scientists began playing around with dangerous pathogens in laboratories, the world has experienced 4 or 5 pandemics, depending on how you count. One of them, the 1977 Russian flu, was almost certainly sparked by a research mishap. Some Western scientists quickly suspected the odd virus had resided in a lab freezer for a couple of decades, but they kept mostly quiet for fear of ruffling feathers. Well, that sounds like we poisoned Russia. Yet in 2020, when people started speculating that a laboratory accident might have been the spark that started the COVID-19 pandemic, they were treated like kooks and cranks. Many public health officials and prominent scientists dismissed the idea as a conspiracy theory, insisting that the virus had emerged from animals in a seafood market in Wuhan, China. And when a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance lost a grant because it was planning to conduct risky research into bat viruses with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, research that, if conducted with lax safety standards, could have resulted in a dangerous pathogen leaking out into the world, no fewer than 77 Nobel laureates, and 31 scientific societies lined up to defend the organization. So the Wuhan research was totally safe, and the pandemic was definitely caused by natural transmission. It certainly seemed like consensus. And of course, these people trust the science, they trust the experts. If there's a claim to consensus, well, that must be true. The experts, they agree. We have since learned, however, that to promote the appearance of consensus, some officials and scientists hid or understated crucial facts, misled at least one reporter, orchestrated campaigns of supposedly independent voices, and even compared notes about how to hide their communications in order to keep the public from hearing the whole story. And as for that Wuhan laboratory's research, the details that have since emerged show that safety precautions might have been terrifyingly lax. 5 years after the onset of the COVID pandemic, it's tempting to think of all of that as ancient history. We learned our lesson about lab safety and about the need to be straight with the public. And now we can move on to new crises like measles and the evolving bird flu, right? Wrong. Okay, and then she gets into talking about a new paper from Cell, one of the scientific expert outlets that lied to us about COVID, about a new pandemic risk. So we're going to skip around a little bit here. You'd think that by now we'd have learned that it's not a good idea to test possible gas leaks by lighting a match. And you'd hope that prestigious scientific journals would have learned not to reward such risky research. Why haven't we learned our lesson? Maybe because it's hard to admit that this research is risky now and to take the requisite steps to keep us safe without also admitting it was always risky and that perhaps we were misled on purpose. So she's talking about how they are protecting the system. And of course, they're always protecting the system. Skipping down again. It's not hard to imagine how the attempt to squelch legitimate debate might have started. Some of the loudest proponents of the lab leak theory weren't just earnestly making inquiries. They were acting in terrible faith, using the debate over pandemic origins to attack legitimate, beneficial science, to inflame public opinion, to get attention. For scientists and public health officials, circling the wagons and vilifying anyone who dared dissent might have seemed like a reasonable defense strategy. So the people we're supposed to trust operate on whether or not they're offended by people questioning them, and Zeynep Tufekci thinks that's okay. She also makes a character-related, that is an ad hominem argument right there. It's because of their bad character and their bad intents that they were saying, no, we think this was a lab leak. So they were wrong, but the people who were saying at the time that they were wrong are still wrong because they were bad people. They were doing it for the wrong reasons. And the scientists, the people who were operating for the good reasons but were wrong, should still be trusted in the future because their defensiveness and their creation of the illusion of consensus when there wasn't actually a consensus and there wasn't actually any proof, well, that was justified because they were being put on the defensive by those bad people. Skipping down. To this day, there is no strong evidence ruling out a lab leak or proving that the virus arose from human-animal contact in that seafood market. The few papers cited for market origin were written by a small, overlapping group of authors, including those who didn't tell the public how serious their doubts had been. So it was very few people who were liars and hid their uncertainties for the political purpose and to get people to continue going along with their program. But we're still not sure what it was one way or the other. And there's more to say about that. Concluding, we may not know exactly how the COVID pandemic started, but if research activities were involved, that would mean 2 out of the last 4 or 5 pandemics were caused by our own scientific mishaps. Let's not make a third. Okay, well, unfortunately, Zeynep, you moron, the truth would be that all of our quote unquote pandemics were caused by some combination of scientific malfeasance and some combination of and media malfeasance. Just for some perspective on Zeynep Tufekci, March 10th, 2023 in the New York Times. Here's why the science is clear that masks work. May 14th, 2021. Maybe we need masks indoors just a bit longer. March 17th, 2020. Why telling people they don't need masks backfired. That was like 4 days after the first pandemic adjustments had started. 6 days after Donald Trump's declaration of a national emergency on COVID, and she was already pitching masks that don't work, that never worked, that never had any chance of helping. Now, here's the problem, and this is what we got to recognize, and this is why I bring this up. She is suggesting that their side of the central narrative, their side, was wrong. They got it wrong. We don't know for sure that the lab leak was the right answer. No one will ever know for sure. But we do know that the people who were pitching the natural origin stuff didn't have any proof. They weren't that confident, and they operated behind the scenes to create the illusion of consensus in the natural origin so that no one would doubt the science. And now, a few years later, because they need us to trust the science again, because there's another pandemic coming, now we can say, mea culpa, it was our fault. We shouldn't have been so bold about the natural origin. It turns out that the central counter narrative was maybe correct. Can't say it's fully correct, but maybe correct. And the lab leak theory was the central counter narrative. What is outside that controlled opposition dynamic between the central narrative and the central counter narrative? Well, that's the idea that there was no pandemic, because there was no pandemic. Now, I would say there's not even a virus, that maybe nothing happened. We might have had some energetic interference. The water might have been poisoned. The food might have been poisoned. We might have been poisoned from the sky. The vaccines themselves might have been poisoned and then shed to others, causing symptomatic reactions. I had, quote unquote, COVID. And I also, years later, just last year, took a regimen of fenbendazole in service of attempting to remove parasites. And what I had was a Herxheimer reaction. You can look it up, Herxheimer, that felt exactly the same as when I had, quote unquote, COVID. So could the flu vaccine that people were taking before the initial very deadly pandemic began have caused problems for people, and then they could have shed that vaccine to others, causing them problems as well? Sure, that could have happened. Lots of things could have happened. We don't know what happened, but one thing we can be perfectly certain of is that every COVID death was either medical malpractice or data malpractice. How can we know that? Because the tests don't work. There's no way to test for COVID, okay? So you can't be certain that someone died from a test that can't pick up that thing. And because virtually no one died for anything other than medical malpractice, which is the COVID protocol, they were actively killed by the hospital, or they died from other things and were also declared COVID or likely COVID so that they could receive government funding for recording those deaths. There's no reason to believe a pandemic occurred. If we looked outside, if we were just going about our normal lives and the television wasn't telling us every day that there was a very deadly pandemic in our midst, and we weren't barred from public events, our world wasn't shut down, our jobs weren't canceled, our careers weren't canceled. Consider all the problems. People went broke. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction, domestic violence, poverty skyrocketed. People had to get rid of their homes. There would have been no evidence whatsoever if we just kept marching on with our reality that there was any pandemic. People were not falling over dead. People were not getting sick and needing to go to the hospital. Some were getting sick and needing to go to the hospital, which always happens, always happens. The idea that there was a very deadly pandemic in our midst from the first instance should be questioned. I believe it should be fully dismissed, but at minimum, it has to be questioned. So to suggest then that we have to decide, we're going to go into our camps and decide that it was either a natural origin or a lab leak has already committed us to the assertion that there was a pandemic in the first place. And there was no pandemic in the first place. If there was a pandemic, we should know pretty easily that there is a pandemic because people would then be dying. But that never happened. Nothing like that ever happened. Let's do one more and then we will get out of here for the day. This is from the Attorney General's office in California. And California's government is as illegitimate as a government could ever be. California's elections are completely and totally fake. They are embarrassingly fake. And the fact that anyone there abides by their results is a testament to how utterly delusional that entire place is. Attorney General Bonta urgently issues consumer alert for 23andMe customers. California Attorney General Rob Bonta today issued a consumer alert to customers of 23andMe, a genetic testing and information company. The California-based company has publicly reported that it is in financial distress and stated in securities filings that there is substantial doubt about its ability to continue as a going concern. I don't know what that means. As a growing concern, probably. Due to the trove of sensitive consumer data 23andMe has amassed, Attorney General Bonta reminds Californians of their right to direct the deletion of their genetic data under the Genetic Information Privacy Act and California Consumer Privacy Act. Californians who want to invoke these rights can do so simply by going to 23andMe's website. And he released a statement. California has robust privacy laws that allow consumers to take control and request that a company delete their genetic data. Given 23andMe's reported financial distress, I remind Californians to consider invoking their rights and directing 23andMe to delete their data and destroy any samples of genetic material held by the company. Wow. Now that is really something. So it's because the company is having financial distress that the Attorney General of California is letting Californians know that they can request their data and their genetic material be deleted? Who would believe that? I would not believe that. By the way, 23andMe was run by, or is run by, one of the Wojcicki brothers, or sorry, sisters. I was thinking of the Wojciechowski brothers, who are now the Wojciechowski sisters. But the Wojcicki, I think is how you say it, sisters. The other used to run YouTube, and I believe passed last year. This sister still running 23andMe, I guess, into the ground. I saw a video earlier where they tested the DNA of a lizard, and they got that it was like, and I guess anti-Semitism, but it was like, it came back from 23andMe that it was like 48% Ashkenazi Jewish and half Southeast Asian or something absolutely crazy. I know that that sounds anti-Semitic or whatever because it's a lizard, but I think it's just more a testament to how much bullshit is involved with this DNA testing, which is in line with the COVID testing we talked about before. Does anybody believe that their data is actually going to be deleted by 23andMe just because the law says they have to do that? I would not believe that. I would also believe that that data has been sold so many times that it wouldn't matter if they deleted it. It wouldn't matter at all. Like, they've got this project to compile the entire human genetic code. And because a couple of Californians decide to take the time to listen to Attorney General Rob Bonta in this statement, and then get online and ask that their data be deleted, that suddenly the project of compiling the entire human genetic code is just going to go out the window. They're going to be like, oh, rats, you got us this time. We almost had it. But now you Californians, you've asked to have us delete your data. So we're going to go ahead and comply with that. No, they're not. That ship has long since sailed, and we should at least be adults about it. Okay. Rumble Rant in the chat. PJ Corrigan. $10. Thanks for another great show, Chris. Your insight is always top notch. Thank you. I hope so. I hope that people are getting something out of this. It is impossible to know. Your guys' feedback is always amazing, but it's impossible to know whether the show is reaching more people or fewer people or whatever. That's been one of the most crazy making elements of this information war nonsense, and how stifled and suppressed we are in being able to communicate publicly. It really is incredible. One day the show will have 1,000 live viewers. The next day it'll have 500. Today there's like 340 in there right now. That shouldn't be a normal thing. And Rumble's numbers have been like across the board, just an absolute mess for years now. And I appreciate Rumble. And obviously I appreciate the hell out of all of you guys, but what in the world is happening? He says, how about an una panuna banca for the road? And of course I am morally required to oblige. Thank you, PJ. Maggie D8, $5. Chris, you asked us to tell you Trump just spoke about the accidental group text leak, and the Atlantic Midnight Rider posted. Midnight Rider is a wealth of relevant clips on a day-to-day basis, and a bunch of stuff that in a million years I would never need to actually look at. But hey, you take the good. And she is very, very helpful with all of that. Now I am scanning her. Here we are. Well done. Okay. So this is Trump and his comments on the Atlantic issue.
know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
I don't know if you notice, Trump may know what this reporter's talking about. He may not know what this reporter's talking about, but he's going to make this reporter make all the claims on the record.
The Houthis, you mean the attack on the Houthis? Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
So you heard the president's words there, and he certainly looks like he is hearing about this for the first time. However, if that is true, that certainly raises many questions of a different kind. That the story has been out for more than 2 hours at that point when he spoke there, and if he was not briefed on it, that is also very interesting. We know this president is someone who receives news often by watching television on his own, by looking at the social media on his own. He's been a big critic of The Atlantic, but he said he didn't know about it. We will see if that continues. But the bottom line here is the White House is reviewing how Jeffrey Goldberg got added to this chain, and also reviewing whether this type of conversation should have been on this chain in the first place.
All right. So the mystery goes on. I would say we should still wait for the Donald Trump reaction and how he pushes that narrative forward. Starborn, $5, dropped the link to the same video, or to a Fox News post about the video, which I assume is the same video. So thank you, Starborn. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, PJ. And where are we? Okay. Let's bring you a word from Rumble, and then we will get on out of here. Weak coffee is for the weak, and at Rumble, weak has never been part of the mission. No fillers, no fraud, and no settling for mediocrity, just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hand-picked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus. No synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. So you get a little sweepstakes action there on the back end. How about that? Okay. With that, I will let you know that Wednesday's subscriber stream will be at 6 p.m. Eastern. I think that subscriber stream, I think I'm going to be able to do it this way. I know that people like participating in the chat on Rumble and less enjoy the live platform on Substack right now. I am sending them a message to ask them to fix the issue where if you leave the stream, you have to come back and find your spot. You're not able to rewind through it, etc. I understand that those things are really important in people's viewing experience. I will do whatever I can. This week, I can have the chat open on Rumble, so I'll just stream it for paid Substack subscribers. You can watch on Substack like last week, or you can watch on Rumble via the link in the Substack post. I'll try to do it that way, like every other week, if possible, okay? So this week, subscriber stream, 6 p.m. Eastern. It'll be on Substack and on Rumble, not premium, just Rumble. And with that, I'll be back on Wednesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you and continue lying to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple. And if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
You down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon, down on the range.